20 years of meditation, what really changes? Have you ever looked at someone after you found out that they've been meditating for 20 years and you're almost like staring and trying to figure out, what has that done to you? And maybe it's impossible to really know unless we're able to have a side-by-side of that person before and after. And even then, a lot of times these shifts, these transformations are inner shifts, and they may not be so perceptible on the outside. So people are often curious, what actually changes in someone after 20 years of dedicated practice? Can't speak for everyone, but today I'm going to share my story and how I think I've changed after 20 years of practice. And this isn't going to be about bragging about my accomplishments or claiming how enlightened I've become, because, spoiler alert, I am not enlightened, not even close. This isn't about perfection, but it's really about sharing what I have noticed in myself as the transformation, as the changes, as these inner shifts that have brought a lot of benefit into my life. I also wanted to share my story because I'll get into this a little bit later, but I think my story represents a pretty typical path and nothing very extreme, and something that's really accessible and achievable for everyone. I think the way that I've practiced has been very imperfect and irregular in a lot of ways, and has been really accessible and really possible for anyone. Whether you're watching this because you're just curious, or whether you're considering committing to your practice, deepening your practice, and you're wondering if it's worth it, then I think what I'm about to share here is really human and really real. So let's get into it. If you are new here, hello, my name is Parisa. I am a certified mindfulness meditation teacher, and I have been practicing for over 2 decades. Wow. I make these videos for you to help you create a personal practice beyond meditation that is clarified, streamlined, personalized, and something that you love coming to, so that you can be self-resourced, self-trusting, and free. And I won't go too deep into the styles of meditation that I've learned and practiced. I don't think that's important here. My practice has definitely evolved over the years, but the main practice that I do come back to as far as meditation, even though today my personal practice has expanded beyond a sitting meditation practice, what I'm really talking about is what I primarily practiced for most of these 20 years, which has been that a single pointed concentration practice. So awareness of the breath at a single point for me, just inside the nostrils. This is not to give instruction for the practice, this is just to give a little bit of context of what kind of practice we're talking about here. And then expanding that field of awareness to include the breath and the entire body. So all of the constantly shifting sensations throughout the body. Sometimes this practice is called insight meditation or vipassana meditation. It doesn't really matter. Just to give you an idea of what I have mostly been practicing. If you've been watching my videos, you know that the way that I share personal practices is far beyond traditional sitting meditation, and I don't think that sitting meditation is the only way, nor is it for everyone. So I don't think that the benefits that I'm going to talk about today are only accessible if you do this one kind of meditation, but that's the kind of meditation that I had been mostly practicing in these past 20 years. So just to give you that context. So even though those have been my main meditation practices, I have practiced in many different traditions with many different techniques over the years, mostly in Theravada tradition, but also in Tibetan Buddhism and a lot of secular clinical mindfulness training and practice. I started going to retreats in my early 20s and would have long periods of intensive practice and daily guidance from a teacher. What I think it's important to know about my practice is I didn't practice meditation every day for those 20 years. There were definitely phases where I was super committed and I was going to retreats once or twice a year, and there was a lot of consistency and deep and regular practice. And then there were a lot of other phases in these 20 years where practice was inconsistent, a little bit irregular. Maybe I would even stop for short periods. And I think it's good to know this because I think that represents most people. Most people in modern life will have gaps in their practice and different phases in their life when they're more connected and more committed, and then a little bit less. And so what I'm about to share about the benefits and the transformations and the changes that I've witnessed in myself are super accessible. I don't believe that you have to leave your life behind and go off to a monastery to really have powerful transformations in your life. And in fact, I think there are a lot of other alternate practices outside of meditation that can offer a lot of benefit and a lot of freedom. But today I'm going to talk about my experience, and this is what my experience has been. So obviously, to encapsulate the changes that one might experience, that I have experienced in 20 years, is a really, really big topic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to organize the changes that I've noticed in a couple big categories. The first one I'm going to call self-disarmament. And I know it's kind of a funny term, an unusual term, not a term that I necessarily hear others using, but when I thought of this word, self-disarmament, it really felt accurate for me as a description of what I've witnessed. And if that word is throwing you off, stay with me. I promise it'll make sense as I unpack it a little bit. And I'm starting with this one because it's probably been the most dramatic and life-changing for me. So what I mean by self-disarmament is this. As we're moving through life, and inevitably life throws at us challenges, things that we want that we're not getting, or things that we get that we don't really want. When these things happen, the way that we're naturally wired, there's a reactivity that happens. And this happens in the form of telling stories about what is happening. And these stories or these narratives generate negative emotions. And I'll go into a few examples in a moment. And the story usually goes something like, this is happening and I don't like it, or the thing that I want to happen is not happening. The story sort of generates these negative emotions, and it doesn't feel good. Most of us, I think, most moments in our lives, even if it's super subtle, are in that place of not okayness. And there is this little dialogue going on, or this inner monologue, I should say, going on, this commentary, this story that we're telling that tells a story that we're not okay with the way things are. And this is what I'm referring to as the arms, the weapons. Maybe these stories can create these walls, this sense of separation with reality. Instead of just really being in a place of observation and noticing and presence, we are caught up in the story that is reacting to the reality, reacting to what is happening. And so it takes us away from presence. It actually is dysregulating to be in these stories. And again, a lot of times this generates negative emotions and it just doesn't feel good. And so one of the big benefits, one of the biggest shifts that I've noticed in myself over the years is it still happens. It still happens. The reactivity is still there. The not being okay with the way things are, wanting to force things, wishing that things were different. But what the practice of meditation has really done for me, or you can call it the practice of mindfulness or noticing or paying attention, is exactly that. It's paying attention and noticing when that dysregulation is happening to the body, noticing when those stories are spinning in the mind, and having the freedom to choose to drop them, to choose to let them go and come into presence. And I'm not really going to go into the instruction of the practice because I have a lot of other videos by now that really guide how to move through and let go of the reactivity. But that putting down the arms, putting down the weapons, letting go of the story and really coming into presence has not only made me feel more connected to the present moment and more peaceful, but more connected to myself and others. I'm going to give an example. I'm going to give an example of how this disarmament really works in relation with others. So we can talk about the classic disharmony that might come up with other people, whether it's your partner, a family member, or a friend. Let's say, for example, someone does something that hurts your feelings or that you don't like. So what can happen in these moments is we react with these stories that we're telling about what is happening. And these stories can be about how we're misunderstood, how we're underappreciated or undervalued, maybe how we're wronged. And these could lead to emotions like hurt and sadness and resentment and anger and all sorts of emotions that really separate us and put up a wall between us and the other person. It's a lot easier now for me after years of practice and so much repetition of noticing and bringing awareness to that they still come up. The reactivity still happens, right? I still arm myself with the story that makes me feel hurt or resentful or whatever the thing is. But then I notice what's happening, and I notice that I'm just really picked up arms. I've really put up a wall, that I've started to construct a story. And in that moment of noticing what's happening, there's space, right? There's suddenly this space, and I can almost listen to the story as if it is playing on the radio somewhere. And I can notice that, okay, that's just a tape playing in my head, often a really old tape that I've played over and over again, some old conditioning and old patterns there. And it's possible to recognize it with compassion and drop it. And really in that moment when you're relating to the other person, remember the good intentions of that person. Remember that these stories are not a reflection of the other person's actions. They're really a reflection of some old conditioning that I have. And so just that recognition and that softening is super liberating. Again, it's as if I've disarmed myself, I've put down the weapons, I've really put a pause to the war that I was creating, and it's so much more peaceful. Another example with just when it's myself, we can do the same thing with ourselves. Maybe I say something or do something, or if we take other people out of the equation, maybe I do something and then I start telling myself stories about how I wish I hadn't done that, I wish I had done something differently. And for most of us, I think there's a lot of stories about being wrong or not good enough and should have done this, and all of the shoulds that we can really impose on ourselves. And basically this inner criticism. Same thing. It's as if I've picked up weapons and I'm sort of attacking myself about it. And again, with practice and the muscle memory of paying attention and noticing and taking that pause and stepping back, all of a sudden I see the pattern, I see that I'm doing that thing that I'm doing. And then this is the key part. Instead of now adding another layer of reactivity that you now criticize yourself for criticizing yourself, you just put down the arms. You disarm yourself. You put down the weapons. You let go of the war. So in this way, I kind of meet myself with compassion, and there's a return to a sense of peacefulness. There's a return to a sense of presence, because again, the stories are what takes us out of presence. And so we're back here, able to meet the needs of the moment with compassion, with presence, and it's a lot more peaceful here. So the next broad category that I want to touch on is once we've recognized the stories, once we've disarmed ourselves, and kind of put that down, that's when we have disentangled from mental content and we're able to reconnect with presence, reconnect with this moment just as it is. And it's from this place of having freed ourselves from the mind and the stories of the mind and the mental content that we can now really be fully awake for this moment of our lives, really be fully present here. And of course, it's from this place that we can really appreciate, that we can really notice the goodness that is all around, the beauty that's all around, even in moments of difficulty, and we can really come into a place of appreciation. So this might be a gratitude practice, it might be a joy practice, but I think it's really something that arises naturally when we're really, really present. Just the sensory experience of being alive, just everyday mundane objects can really ignite appreciation and joy. And that makes us feel good, and it makes everything feel a little bit lighter and a little bit brighter. It's important to note that this is possible even when external circumstances aren't that great. At the time of filming, there's a lot of turmoil happening in the world. So it's not to dismiss that, just that this capacity, this habit to really choose where we pay attention means that in any given moment with all of the diversity of things that are happening, it's possible to choose to have a balanced view. And I've talked about this in other videos, so I won't go into it too much, but we do tend to lean toward all the things that are wrong. And so actually choosing to pay attention to what is right, what is good, what is beautiful, usually for most of us doesn't mean that we're bypassing or that we're dismissing or denying any other of the darker realities. It actually brings a little bit more balance. It actually is a little bit closer to truth. Obviously, there's so much more to say, and I can go on and on about the benefits that I have experienced from meditation and all of the positive changes that I've witnessed in myself over the years. I could talk about it forever because that's why I started the channel. You know, this desire to share the practices comes from a deep and enthusiastic appreciation for what they've brought into my life. So again, for today, keeping them in these two broad categories that I'm calling self-disarmament, which is probably just me rebranding non-reactivity, but I really like that word. And yeah, the capacity to notice and to choose where to pay attention and to lean into appreciation and feeling good. But this, in these two broad categories, is what meditation has brought me. This is the freedom that it's brought me in my life. And whether you've been practicing for a really long time or just starting out, and whether that's a sitting practice for you, a formal, traditional sitting, silent meditation practice, whether that's these micro practices throughout the day where you pause and you really notice your breath, like you can do it right now, or whether it's going for walks and noticing the sensation underneath your feet, whether it's people watching and sending kindness and care to the people that you see, or writing as a way to really notice the stories and maybe write some better ones. Wherever you are in your practice and whatever your personal practice is, I hope that this simply shines a light on what is possible. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be after 20 years, right? Even in the beginnings, as we're really waking up attention and really noticing stories, the freedom is there. I like to say the fruits of the practice line the entire path. They're not just waiting at the end. I'd love to hear what changes you've noticed in yourself or what aspirations you have for yourself as you continue in your practice. I love connecting with you all in the comments. Thank you so much for being here. I love you. It's good to be here together, and I'll see you next time.